Ladies and gentlemen, shout out to Fight Hype. Psalm 6 verse 10 says, "Let all my enemies be ashamed and sore vexed. Let them return and be ashamed suddenly." You know, we always like to think of our enemies as physical enemies, but I always think of the enemies such as fear and hatred, selfishness, envy, lies. I think of those also as enemies. And when they can retreat and be ashamed to exist in us, then we really are doing well. And this is what King David was speaking of the Lord. I want to talk a little bit about the unflattering part of boxing a lot of people don't know of. First of all, a lot of boxers never attain the kind of money and success that, say, a boxer that you're looking at here, shout out to Fight Hype, Andre Ward, has attained. And a lot of times people think that Andre Ward, he's unbeatable and he has these incredible successes. This is when he fought Sullivan Barrera. But nobody knows how badly banged up sometimes these fighters are, and basically how much punishment they have taken at the end of a fight. Nobody knows about that, see? So I'm just going to allow Fight Hype to show you what Andre Ward, some of the damage Andre Ward took in that fight. And we're going to look at how he got a cut over his eye. Now, this is a standard operation where most fighters who get a cut over their eye, they get stitched back up at the end of the fight. While everybody's gone home and they're celebrating and everything, the boxers, some of them have to go back. They have to go to the hospital to be treated. And like Andre Ward here, he has to get a shot of lidocaine to numb the pain before he gets stitched back up. So here you're looking at a very uncomfortable situation where the doctor is pushing lidocaine into the cut. Andre Ward is really feeling the pain. He can't move his hand. He can't move his head because then he'll get stuck in his eyeball. So there you go. He just got administered the lidocaine. And his eye's going to bleed in a minute. But the doctor's then going to stitch back his eye. And I'm going to just let you guys see this. It's very uncomfortable to watch. And I'm just going to say, that's part of boxing. Okay? What people forget to understand is boxing is a sport where when you're going home saying, "Oh, he won the fight," or you got those big trade-off fights where you see a lot of bloodshed and stuff. When you're going home, guess where the boxers are going? This is the unflattering part. They're going to the hospital, friend. They're going to the hospital. Alright? Yeah, that's blood eking out of Andre Ward's eye because the doctor realized that the cut went through the muscle, and it also cut through the skin and went through the muscle. It just didn't go all the way down to the bone. And this cut came from a headbutt. So even when you are seemingly outclassing an opponent, you may have dropped them or whatever, you can get injuries. Another thing that people never really pay attention to, and I just want to fast track from here in a second. I just want you to see this in its great detail. Because if you're feeling uncomfortable right now, you should. You should feel uncomfortable because, I've been in the medical field for a little bit, but you should feel uncomfortable because these are some of the things that happen in boxing. Notice Andre Ward's eye is swelling up as well. The cut over his eye is swelling. His face is swollen. I want you to see all the bruises and bumps he's gotten. And actually, fighters, they had to kind of sit down in ice to make sure that the cuts and bruises, they actually go away. Another thing people don't know is boxers repeatedly get cuts inside of their nose. When they get punched to the nose, the tissue in there gets ruptured. There's actually scar tissue inside of a boxer's nose. That's why when you say you have a boxer's nose, some of the cartilage is kind of gone away from the boxer's nose, all right, from repeated punching to the nose. So all of these things happen. So a boxer, when he's fighting, they tell him not to blow, because then you'll blow out all the blood and it'll rupture the area and bleed even more. And those are just minor things. That's standard stuff that happens in boxing. So you learn how to breathe through your nose or breathe through your mouth. Okay. They also take punches to the ear. Some boxers have ruptured eardrums. Some of them have swollen eardrums. Nobody ever talks about this, but boxing is a sport. 4 people died this year already from the sport of boxing, and some of them were promising boxers. And I think 2 are in comas now. It's a very, very violent sport. You have to understand. While you are, oh yeah, get him knocked out and stuff, some boxers, they leave the fight fine, they reach home, and in a couple hours they collapse. And then they have to get an ambulance to them to carry them to the hospital. Even though they went to the hospital, they got CT scans, whatever, and they were shown to be okay. And then the tissue starts to really just swell up. Or some of them, because of their diets, they have an infection inside of them, and the body's run down just enough for the infection to infect certain key organs like their heart, their liver. Remember, you're taking punches. Even Andre Ward in his flawless execution, some people would say, of Sullivan Barrera, I want to show you that he was actually taking punches. So you see his eye getting stitched back up here. Alright, the doctor's stitching it back up as it bleeds. So if this is very uncomfortable for you, it's supposed to be uncomfortable. Okay. Let's just move on to something I want to show you here. So let's just show you some highlights of Ward versus Sullivan Barrera. This is courtesy of Sugarcane Mosley. Shout out to him. So you see Barrera land his jab to the pit there. Now that jab to the pit is a hard punch. Andrew Wood actually kind of parried it away there. Andrew Wood landed the jab to the pit. But Sullivan Barrera is a very strong fighter. He just took a sharp jab to the head, right? But he also lands a punch to Andre Ward there. A straight jab to the body. Catches him with an overhand right and then a left hook. Now let me just tell you, those punches, if Sullivan Barrera was to hit me with that punch, he'd kill me or break my jaw. Okay? I'm not trained. I don't have the resistance, the punch resistance for that, and also I don't know how to roll those punches. Those guys, when they throw hard. Okay? If they were in a street fight with a street fighter and they punched that street fighter, they'd break his jaw. They could kill somebody. Okay? These guys have licensed weapons. I try to explain that to people. So the kind of punishment, though Andre Ward beat Sullivan Barrera, the kind of punishment he took in that fight, which a lot of people don't understand, it'll affect you for a couple of days. Yes, you take that kind of punishment in sparring and stuff too, but what I'm saying is it still affects you for a couple of days. Your body needs to regroup. Your organs need to regroup, because every shot to the pit, every shot to the spleen, every shot to the liver actually damages the organs. And remember, it's about taking less punishment, because the longer your boxing career, okay, if a boxer goes for 20 years, he's repeatedly taking punishment for 20 years. And most boxers, they really take the bulk of their punishment in preparation for a fight. So there's all this punishment you take for 20 years, okay? Boxing is dangerous not because of the shots, any singular shot. It's the accumulation of punishment over years that makes boxing dangerous. The repeated shots to the head. They always say, the boxer who's a knockout artist, the opponents that face him, they actually suffer less damage than a boxer who's not a knockout artist and is repeatedly hitting these boxers to the head or to the body. If you go 12 rounds and this guy can't stop you and he can't knock you out, but he's repeatedly hitting you to the head, you're actually getting repeated trauma to your head. And it's actually, you may end up with worse damage than if a boxer just flat out knocked you out or stopped you. So the thing with boxing, which makes it a very grueling and deadly sport, is the accumulation of punishment. And if you're not using sufficient diet, you're not sufficiently recouping, you're not sufficiently resting, it will kill you. Okay? So you can't go in there and play boxing, especially for your career. You can't be playing boxing for your career. Now I want to highlight a couple other things about the sport of boxing, but suffice it to say, I've seen a documentary on Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s hands, and it wasn't just his hands, it was his back. That's why he used to, it was his arm, his hands, and his back, which were giving him problems, and he had to actually use paraffin, put his hands into paraffin to do treatment for his hands. He had to have a masseuse massage his rotator cuffs and his shoulders, and then there was another masseuse to massage his back, because his back muscles started cramping up and started doing involuntary movements, kind of like what Terry Norris started to suffer with. So what I'm saying is the training routines, even Bruce Lee had these muscle spasms because of his intense training. When you're trying to prep for something, Andre Ward always had rotator cuff injuries, and it seems as though it affected his shoulders and his back. And this guy at the top of the game He had people treated because he had the money to get treatment, and he would just perform out there. But you don't even understand under what conditions this guy's continuously performed at. My point is the sacrifice that boxers take. And then the last thing I want to talk about, you and I wouldn't be able to take that. I'm just telling you. The last thing I want to talk about is mental conditioning. Jesse Hart made a statement which was very true. Jesse Hart, when he faced Deshaun Johnson, Deshaun Johnson was a journeyman, okay? And mentally, it was a step up for Jesse Hart. But when he was dropped by Deshaun Johnson in round 10, Jesse Hart was able to tell people that, look, man, just because a guy is a journeyman doesn't mean you take this guy for granted. And he cited Floyd Mayweather when Floyd Mayweather faced Emmanuel Augustus. Oh, here we are. Floyd Mayweather when he faced Emmanuel Augustus. Emmanuel Augustus, when Floyd Mayweather faced him, was 22-16-4. But if you really were to investigate that 22-16-4, you would find out that Emmanuel Augustus faced some very high-level opposition, and he just didn't get certain decisions against him. So before he faced Floyd Mayweather, he faced the following people. He had a lot of experience. All right? He had faced Teddy Reed for the interim NABF Super Lightweight title. He had faced John Molina. John Molina was a world champion, and he didn't get the decision. Okay? And then after he faced Floyd Mayweather, he also faced Mickey Ward, Leonard Doran, David Diaz, Ruslan Provodnikov. All right, he faced all of these different people, and my point is, this guy was a journeyman that had skill sets where he could roll and move whip punches, which made him someone who was more than he appeared, than his record showed. And very similarly, Jesse Hart faced Deshaun Johnson, who also had some depth to his resume. And he was kind of like a gatekeeper. He reminded me, both Deshaun Johnson and Emmanuel Augustus remind me of another fighter named Gabe Rosado. Gabe Rosado is a Puerto Rican fighter who grew up in Philly. And Gabe Rosado gave Gennady Golovkin a hell of a fight. He gave Peter Quillin a hell of a fight. But he lost. His record is not the most flattering record in the world. More of like a gatekeeper or a journeyman's record. But the point is, if you underestimate this guy's experience and what he's done and what kind of fights he's had, you would get into trouble. So Deshaun Johnson, he faced Glenn Tapia. He lost to him. He faced Jamel Charlo, okay? This guy also faced guys like Joshua Clottey, Dominic Wade. And then he faced Jesse Hart. So he brought other things to the table than just a what is called a journeyman record. The guy had experience. And Jesse Hart was beating him round after round, and then the guy caught him with a shot and put him down. Now, the one thing I noticed about Jesse Hart, he's very sharp as a boxer, but I also noticed that he, I don't know about his chin. I mean, he's a warrior, though. We'll see. He's going to be facing Gilberto Ramirez, who's not really a heavy puncher or anything. So it should be an interesting fight nonetheless. But the guy does talk confident, so we'll see. With Andre Ward, he faced a journeyman that everybody knows as Darnell Boone. And Darnell Boone ain't no joke. Darnell Boone has pulled the upset on one or two fighters. He's actually pulled the upset. He's actually stopped one or two fighters. And in this case, early in Andre Ward's career, in the sixth rounder, Darnell Boone dropped him. Okay? Now, interestingly enough, Darnell Boone goes on to face people such as Brian Vera, Curtis Stevens, Edwin Rodriguez, Arislandi Lara, and then Adonis Stevenson, who he stopped. Okay, so then he faced Sergey Kovalev, which he had a split decision fight with, and a rematch. Sergey Kovalev got knocked out. He faced Willie Monroe Jr., who he beat. All right, so while this guy has a 23, 24, and 4 record, once again, this guy was actually dangerous, and you had to pay attention to him. So what I'm saying is, just because someone has a journeyman record doesn't necessarily mean that they're a bum, or they're a journeyman, or they're, because they're on the downhill swim, they don't have skills to help a fighter go to the next level, or to see if a fighter is prepared for the next level. All right, mentally and physically. Muhammad Ali. There were 2 fights in which Muhammad Ali actually got beaten, or almost beaten, and those 2 fights were with a fighter named Henry Cooper. Henry Cooper dropped Muhammad Ali in his very first fight. He knocked him down in round 4. Now, Henry Cooper was really coming. He had that left hook, and man, he caught Muhammad Ali with that left hook and dropped him. Now, while they gave a TKO in round 5 to Henry Cooper, like Gabe Rosado, Henry Cooper got cut over his eyes very easily, and unfortunately his cuts caused him to have the fight stopped against Cassius Clay. When he rematched Henry Cooper, Cassius Clay that is, again, a cut over Henry Cooper's eye caused the fight to be stopped, and again the fight seemed to be going a certain way. Henry Cooper, the first time he met Muhammad Ali was 27-8-1, and the second time he faced Muhammad Ali was 33-11-1. And the thing that's interesting about Henry Cooper, though he was a journeyman, or had a journeyman's record, was this. It was a high-level journeyman's record, but nonetheless, Henry Cooper went on to face Joe Bugner, Carl Mildenberger, Floyd Patterson, Zora Foley, and I think that's about it. Okay? So, my point being this. He lost a lot of fights to these guys, and in the end, he had a 40-14-1, which is not a journeyman record, but nonetheless, at the time, he was kind of like a borderline journeyman against Muhammad Ali. He performed, while he didn't win most of his fights against those top level guys, the top 10 guys, he did perform pretty well, okay, in the fights themselves. When we look at Manny Pacquiao was stopped early in his career by a fighter named Rustico Torocampo, which was 11-4-5. Okay, he was knocked out by Rustico Campo. And Rustico Campo, just so you guys can see for the record, Rustico Campo had a record of 15-8-6, so he was much of a journeyman. And I don't know any of these fighters he faced, but I can tell you this. Again, if you underestimate your opponent, they could beat you. All right? Vladimir Klitschko. Vladimir Klitschko had his first loss to a fighter he was beating down and outclassing in Ross Purity. And Ross Purity was 24-13-1. Okay, this was supposed to be a routine fight. And Klitschko gassed himself out. There was nothing special about Ross Purity at all. Okay? And Klitschko basically gassed himself out. Ross Purity has been beaten by just about every top-level opponent there is to beat him. But he got the win over Vladimir Klitschko. However, Ross Purity also faced some other great fighters in the division. He faced Tommy Morrison. He drew with him. He faced Michael Grant, Hasim Rahman, Corey Sanders, Chris Bird. Lost to all of them, by the way. Vitaly Klitschko, Eddie Chambers, All of these guys beat Ross Purity. Vladimir Klitschko lost to Ross Purity because he was able to last through all of that beating and eventually stopped Klitschko, who had run out of gas. So it can happen. You can have someone who's really a bum, but end up beating you, literally. And that's because you underestimate your opponent. The last person I'm going to talk about is Thomas Hearns and his famous loss to Iran Barkley. Iran Barkley, when Thomas Hearns faced him, was 24-4-0, because Iran Barkley's not really a journeyman, because he has a career of 43-19-1, but still, he has lost to Trevor Burbank. He's lost to a whole bunch of people we don't even know who they are. He lost to James Toney. He lost to Nigel Benn, Michael Nunn, Roberto Duran, Sumbu Kalimbe, who was he was a junior middleweight champion, and then he moved up to middleweight and he became middleweight champion. He was a good boxer. Hey, I don't know anybody he actually beat that was worth the while talking about. The only person he beat, and he beat twice, was Thomas the Hitman Hearns. Who would think a living legend would get beaten by a guy who actually turns out to be a high-level journeyman? So all I'm saying to you guys is that in boxing, it's one of those weird sports where you can't underestimate your opposition. You have to prepare for them. And in so doing, you pay the ultimate price by having wear and tear on your body to prepare for everybody. That's why Floyd Mayweather always says, I never underestimate my opponent. He learned that lesson from Emmanuel Augustus, who he thought he would just go in the ring and get out of there. He learned that lesson from Paul Spadafore. He learned out of season he needed to be in shape. And so when I hear Jesse Hart echoing these sentiments, it tells me that these kinds of fights with journeymen, and why they're so necessary, is they sometimes, high-level journeymen especially, they can make you step up your game, realize you're not all that, center you down onto earth, and make you a student of the sport of boxing even more than you were before. Listening to your trainers, listening to people who can give you good advice and good knowledge. And always remember, folks, boxing is the hurt business, and therefore boxers who find themselves in that, they take punishment. There's no boxer that enters the ring and doesn't get a punch landed on them and takes some kind of punishment. And usually the punishment that you take has lasting effects throughout your life. I don't care what boxer you are. You may have money to treat yourself and take care of yourself, but we've seen from Roger Mayweather, who's the Black Mamba, we see what's happening to him right now. We've seen Bobby Shah Khan. We've seen Terrible Terry Norris. We've seen Mildred Taylor. We've seen even Roy Jones Jr., he's got a kind of slurred speech right now. We look at people like Evander Holyfield. We look at people like Muhammad Ali, the great Muhammad Ali. He could barely talk properly after a certain point and move properly. He lasted pretty long because he had the money to deal with his health, but still. So my point being this. You even listen to Shane Mosley, and he has this heavy drawling lisp. The more punishment you take in the sport of boxing, as much as you love it, the longer you stay in a sport where you're taking punishment, is the more side effects you're going to have from the sport. And that's just the way it is. So I decided to make this video to share it with you guys and understand somewhat of the world of a boxer. On that note, you guys have a great one.